So I've been asked to do a video regarding runes, rune work, and so forth. Before setting out on it, I think that it's important that we define what is meant by these terms that we're going to use, magic and all this kind of stuff. If you haven't checked out my ebook on magic, I'm going to flog that right now. Go check it out. It'll be on sale all month, and you can sort of understand a little bit more about the way that I define magic and these ideas. I am a lifelong hater of the esoteric for the sake of being esoteric. Making things more difficult than they need to be, and trying to obfuscate knowledge for the sake of trying to set yourself up as a master. I think that the runes are for all, and I think the question, what is a rune, can be simply answered by the runes are everything. They make up everything, and I believe that the runes can be looked at almost as a periodic table of concepts, not matter, although there is some crossover between the two. This is a really big topic, and so we're going to break it down into the 3/8 video by video. So without too much ado or pre-explanation, I want to sort of break down the idea that when we look at the runes, and I don't think that there's a right way or a wrong way to look at this, so most of this is just coming from my own notions and my own experience of working with them for the last 20 odd years. I think that they can be looked at as both periodic table of concept, focal point, meditation tool, but also as a pathway. And what I mean by this is I believe that one of the ways that the runes can be used is to understand the world by looking at the first 8 as sort of tools that we need to make ourselves kings in this world. The second 8 I look at as huge concepts that make up the backbone of cosmos and our place in it. And I believe the third row can be looked at as taking those other 2 concepts and tools and applying them in order to make a legend out of oneself, to use sort of dramatic terminology. So to follow that up, we can start out by saying, okay, well, the runes can be looked at not necessarily always in a linear fashion either. They're more, I think, like fabric and web and weave than they are straight line. And I think that falls very much in line with Germanic thinking of looking at things in a cyclical fashion, but also in a woven fashion and a layered fashion. Anybody who knows anything about Germanic poetic practices or anything like that knows that there's this idea called kenning in Old Norse, and what that means is referring to a thing as another thing in order to layer the meaning and to hide the original meaning, so that it's only understood by people in the know. I think that this applies very, very, very much to the runes, and I believe that every rune can be looked at on a surface level, and that as soon as you pass the surface level and you reach one level of depth, they drop and they deepen, and as your understanding of them deepens, so does their breadth. And I believe that they constantly will continue to do this throughout your life, and that's the reason why I've stuck with them for so long and why I've studied them and worked with them for so long, is because I believe their application is endless. I believe their impact is infinite, and I believe that they can be used in a no bullshit way as tools and agents of change in your life if you view them in a way that empowers them. And what I mean by this is that I don't believe, like a lot of these fucking hocus pocus peddlers, that a rune stave by itself has some sort of innate might to it. I believe that it's lines drawn that refer to a concept. Just as I believe that you cannot breathe a drawing of the chemical makeup of air, you can't use just a drawing of something to do anything. Everything has to have intent behind it. So the runes, when we begin to look at them almost as living objects, allies, tools, we start to understand their use. If I have a wrench in my hand and I've never used it to undo a bolt, the wrench has no power in and of itself. Until I learn its proper application, I can't use it for anything. It's just something that sits there inert. So with the runes, they're very personal, and I believe that as we grow and as we use them, we create our own rune rows. And as we bind them together and start to create our own symbolisms and our own relationships with them, that's where they begin to get their true power. So I don't think that you can use them on an entry level the same way as you can use them after you've worked with them for a number of years. But we're going to talk today about the first 8 and how I believe those are concepts that we all need to understand before we can sort of set out on the road of kings. So when we look at the first 8, we can see the beginning rune, Fehu. I'm going to try to touch on these concepts in a way that maybe has not been touched on before, or maybe in a more practical way. So everybody can look at the runes and they can read the rune poems, and I encourage everybody to do that. And, you know, you're going to have a lot of people come to it and they're going to be like, okay, Fehu means cow. And you're like, yeah, well, sure, it means cow. But what it means to me, my notion of it is it's mobile power. You know, back then, people's wealth and all this kind of stuff was tied up in this idea of mobility. So they would wear a lot of their wealth. A lot of their wealth was in livestock or whatever, movable items. So I believe that this idea of Fehu definitely refers to wealth as a current that can be used, but I also think that it refers to the idea of the importance of mobility in your power. And so I think that it can be applied to one's personal might, one's personal power, what they refer to as hamingya, sort of luck, but luck that grows and decreases by deed. So what I mean by this is that, you know, you build up your personal power and your personal legend by deed. When you accomplish one thing, you can accomplish a bigger thing. So in that way, it correlates to like weightlifting. You can't curl or like bench 300 pounds until you've already benched 225. You have to build your way up. And so I think that this refers to an idea of mobile power that the individual carries with him that is growable. That's a concept that is very important because it's like the spark. Every huge blaze begins as this little thing, and that's a very important idea and concept to remember in our day-to-day lives, is that, you know, whatever you're doing might not seem like a big deal, but you have to view all your actions as a seed that has the potential to grow into a great thing. Uru's the second rune, of course, you know, we know means aurochs, you know, an extinct great horned roamer of the moors, but it refers to the idea of tenacity, of will, of drive, stubbornness, this very necessary concept of cussedness, the ability to keep going and to keep driving forward, power, might. Thurisaz, I think that we can look at, and there's a really big mystery, I believe, hidden in the Thurisaz rune that you know, you might not see at the beginning, but, you know, Thurisaz is made up of the Isa rune, the ice rune, which we can touch on later, and the Kenaz rune from the first 8 melded together. Obviously, in the Norse cosmology, fire and ice came together to create the entirety of what is, and if the runes represent the entirety of what is, then it's very important that this Thurisaz rune is sort of encapsulates all those ideas of two things coming together to transform into another thing in an aggressive outward fashion. I think that there's a lot to be said about that rune there, but for those who don't believe necessarily in the ideas of count and tally, which we'll get into later, and the numerical significance of the runes, if you take every rune 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 all the way through 24, you'll come up to 300. 300's absolute value is 3, which means that the entirety of the numbers added together from the runes come up to 3, which is ice and fire coming together to form everything. So whether or not that was initially intended doesn't matter much to me, because it makes sense for the way that I use them. So Ansus, you know, is elevated consciousness, heightened consciousness, ecstasy, the feeling we get when we fuck or we fight or we're writing music or whatever it is that sort of puts you into that mindset. I believe that Ansus can be experienced in all those things I just mentioned, as well as in entheogenic use, spirit plants, allies, all this sort of thing. I think that Ansus is sort of our reason to live, especially those who follow the pathway of the one who discovered the runes. I think that Ansuz is not the representation necessarily of Odin, but of what Odin represents, what his name means. Odin is not, in my opinion, some guy from these stories. It is the Norse word oath with the definite article in after it, which means the. Oath means the ecstasy, the ecstatic one, he who is ecstasy. So that's a very important rune for anybody who's on this road. Rytho, the next rune, I don't think refers so much to movement necessarily as it does to right action. The ability to take these things and to put them in their proper order and to make them make sense, to fashion them in a consistent way. And I think that that's an important concept. We can, just like we were talking about with applying the runes, we can draw anything we want to on paper, but the way to apply them correctly is what separates someone who's on his way to becoming a master from someone who's just begun. Kanaz, we talked about a little bit with the Thurisaz rune, but Kanaz, I believe, is the fire of passion, of our will and our need, that friction that's created here to create and to find meaning. It's sort of when you find your true will, whatever your true desire is, it sort of lights the pathway for the rest of your existence. And I think that that's a very important thing to find. And I think that the first part of the great work in general is finding what that is, that reason for life. Gebo is a rune of crossroads, things meeting, that point of exchange. And I think that Gebo, this part of the rune, is less important than the center part. I believe that Gebo is showing us that this center point of exchange is where we can learn a lot of things. It's a sacrificial rune, the cross, and Odin hanging on a tree in order to exchange essentially his self with a small s for his self with a capital S. The whole story of Odin is about, in my opinion, a man who sacrificed everything he was for everything he knew he could become. So the rune Gebo is very much invested in the understanding of what can be gained from exchange, what we can trade for what, and the knowledge that all of life is an exchange. Everything is a sacrifice for something else. Vunyo, I believe, is a rune of consonance. Everyone uses Vunyo as happiness. That concept's never really resonated with me, because what is happiness? To me, satisfaction is consonance. It's knowing that everything in your life has been applied and linchpinned together in a way that makes sense together. And I think that the idea of Vunyo is a tribal banner. And anyone who's been in a group knows that when everything is in its place and everything pulls its weight, there is a great satisfaction and a great power and a great strength and a great calmness there. And I think Vunyo refers to that. So as we look through the rune row, we can see these basic concepts, things needed by the human in order to begin making something of himself. So next time we'll get into the second 8 as the concepts of cosmogony and these great big Jotnar, these giants of ideas that we can begin to break apart and sort of study as fragmentary, and then sort of start putting the whole thing together when we get to the third 8. If you enjoyed this, please check out any of my other ebooks on the subject on Magic, Stathagaldr, which can all be found at operationwerewolf.com. And I hope you enjoyed this, and check out the next one.